You are listening to the Maple Footy Podcast, the unofficial football podcast of the North. I'm your host, Sam Little. Find me on socials at SamLittle44 and the podcast at Maple Footy Pod. And now there's nothing left to say except for sit back, enjoy, and welcome to the show.
Hello, yes, and welcome back to the Maple Footy Podcast. And today is a different one. Today we are discussing the Premier League so far. We're 15 match days into the season, so just over a third-ish. Really approaching halfway. But this is one I've been wanting to do. Was gonna maybe do it last week, and then of course my voice was. Still don't think it's 100%, but you know, we can't postpone everything forever because then nothing would happen. Not to get philosophical on you, but yeah. Firstly, just want to make a statement about the podcast. As of recording this today, sad news came out. The Golden Globe Awards have now introduced a category for best podcasts. Maple Footy, sadly, did not make the cut. So I cannot be referred to as a Golden Globe nominee, at least this year. So this is my statement that the 2027 Golden Globe campaign for Maple Footy has officially started. We will be nominated come 2027. Hopefully. So we'll see on that. But yeah, devastating news if you're a fan of the podcast and a fan of the Golden Globes. We can't have everything, I suppose. If we did, we'd be spoiled. Sadly, I would enjoy being spoiled because calling myself a Golden Globe nominee would be rather fun. But of course, that does not deter us from giving you some great footy coverage, some great opinions. Well, hopefully you think they're great. And if you don't, then let me know how bad you think they are. Why don't we get into this? We're kind of going to do it in sections, I suppose, of who's battling relegation, really. Mid-table teams, and then our European pushes, just to talk about everyone, and we'll kind of go from there. I'll kind of talk about what's impressed me about each team, what concerns me about each team, and I will say for a lot of these teams, basically all of them, you could probably do a multiple, honestly, podcast episodes about each of them and their seasons so far. So these will probably be pretty condensed kind of spark notes, feelings and whatnot. Just want to touch base because, as you do know, if you are a supporter of the podcast, if I'm not following Canadian soccer, I am in fact a Chelsea fan, and I watch Chelsea and they are my team, so I know the Premier League, and that's the one that I follow the most of like soccer leagues or football leagues. So that's the one that I kind of and the most familiar with, and what teams are kind of doing in this league and what have you. You know, I follow what our Canadians are doing in, say, Serie A, what they're doing in La Liga, what they're doing in Belgium, what have you. But for the most part, if I'm not doing that, I am, in fact, passionately cheering and crying about the Chelsea results. So, our relegation teams, yeah. I will preface this by saying I'm really glad to see that a change as of recent seasons of teams that got promoted don't instantly look to be dead on arrival. Now, they could still get relegated, don't get me wrong, but there at least looks to be fight in all of these teams. They all made some pretty decent signings, and are at least showing up and showing some fight and showing some grit about them that they might be able to stay up. They're not all implementing that same play style that worked in the championship for them, which is usually a big pitfall of promoted teams. What worked for them in the championship, they come up, try to do it in the Premier League, but it's a totally different league, totally different level of opposition, and it just doesn't really work. And then that's why a lot of them tend to go right back down. And as I said, these teams could still go down. The promoted teams, Leeds, Burnley, and Sunderland, I would say, it would take a pretty big stumble from here to not stay up, but, don't want to speak too soon. But all three of them could still all go down. But, come this point, come December of last year, you already knew that the teams that came up were just going right back down anyways. So I'm really glad that at least there are some fight in these guys. Looking at the three teams in the relegation zone, though, Wolves, 14 games played. They do play Manchester United tonight as of recording this. 14 games played, 2 points, 2 draws. Everything else is a loss. They are sitting on negative 22 goal difference. That is absolutely abysmal. Just not good. And I remember last season I really tooted my own horn because I kept on saying, after Wolves had a very slow start last season as well, not as slow as this one, I kept on saying, Wolves tend to have slow starts this season, and then they turn it around, and then they're good. And then that worked last season, partially because they did turn around, but partially because the 3 teams that went down were just so not up to snuff for the rest of the league that it was kind of a bit easier to stay up last season if you weren't one of those newly promoted sides. Wolves have found it super difficult. They've already had 2 managers. Victor Pereira, who was sacked in mid-November. Now they have Rob Edwards. I don't think that we're going to see a miracle turnaround for Wolves right now. They're already 8 points behind Burnley, who are in 19th. This is not good at all. You are nearly halfway through a season, and you don't have even a singular win. That's absolutely brutal. They, of course, did lose guys like Cunha over the summer, but they do still have some decent guys in there that have that Premier League experience. I really thought that this season would have been maybe a big season for Strat Larson, who ended last season very good. Huang Hee Chang also had a pretty decent season. Jose Sa is a pretty serviceable goalkeeper, and then even behind him, you have a guy like Sam Johnston, Matt Doherty, Totti in defense. These aren't bad players, so I really don't know what's going on with Wolves. Maybe this is just a season where it all capitulates for them and it's over. I don't really see them bouncing back from this. I could be proven wrong. There is still more than half a season left, but if this season is an indicator of how they've done so far, I just don't see it. They keep on losing games. Only got the 2 draws to their name. That is just not good at all. They started the season with a 4-0 thumping to Man City. Never really have really shown much throughout the rest of the season. A couple draws, like a big draw, 2 big draws. They're 2 draws. Tottenham 1-1, Wolves and Brighton 1-1, and then the rest are just losses. I will say at least some of their losses are kind of close-ish, like they're 1-0s, but the problem is they're just not scoring goals. They're just not scoring goals, and their team just looks out of answers. A lot of questions that they don't really look like they know what they're doing, and that's a shame. Moving up the table, we got Burnley, who are still alive here, which is good. They were actually, even though they finished first in the championship last season, they were the team I was most concerned about getting promoted. Scott Parker, not known for his managerial success in the Premier League, has never really fared super well in the Prem. They were also that team that played a very distinct, attacking, free-flowing style in the championship. And that's usually the type of football that gets you relegated when you're a newly promoted team. They haven't really played that style. He has adjusted them pretty well. They do sit back. They do defend. They try to take care of any goal that they score, really. They have themselves a couple of decent results, but the last run of games that they've been on has not been good. They've lost a lot in a row. They've lost 6 in a row. Sorry, I just paused to count it. They've lost 6 in a row. They don't look phenomenal, but they at least look like they are capable of maybe getting some results. Even some of the results where they've lost, like against Manchester United, where they lost 3-2. They were super in that game for the entire game. Lost 1-0 narrowly to Liverpool, the defending champs. Lost 2-1 to Aston Villa, who have had a great season. They've beaten Leeds, they've beaten Wolves, so some relegation counterparts there. Those are big points that you want to get, and you want to keep trying to build on those. The problem is I just don't think they have that squad to really get them. They lack a lot of Premier League experience. I know the signing of like a Kyle Walker is pretty good. Of course, it is an older Kyle Walker, but still, you bring in a guy like Kyle Walker, that's not bad. And Ashley Barnes, who has Premier League experience, of course, he's not going to go out there and get you 20, 25 goals in a season, but he does have that Prem experience. Armando Broja, also is a pretty decent guy to have in the squad, as my voice starts to go again. But yeah, I just think that they kind of lack that star power, which is kind of expected for, all due respect, a team like a Burnley. They're not known for having great big stars, but they are still very much alive, 5 points away from safety, 15 games played. That's not a terrible spot to be in at this point in the season. West Ham United. This is a team, if I'm a West Ham fan, I'm sweating. I am sweating. Another team that has gone through 2 managers. They started the season with Graham Potter, and he was not doing super hot. They brought in Nuno, and I can't really say he's done much better. You know, Nuno freshly off of being sacked by Forest, another team that has gone through more managers than I have socks this year. They just don't, another team that just doesn't look up to it. They look like they've been figured out. Started the season terribly as well, which was one of the reasons why Potter did get the sack. They lost just so much right out the gate. 3-0 to Sunderland, then 5-1 to Chelsea. Then they picked up a win against Forest, but then right back to losing against Tottenham, Palace, Arsenal, Brentford, Leeds. And it kind of just keeps going. They've lost to Liverpool, drawn with United, drawn with Brighton, but it's not really looking good. Another team that lacks that star power. They, of course, did lose one of their marquee men in Kudos over the summer, who went to Tottenham, but they do still have guys like Paqueta, Souček, guys that have done it for them. Callum Wilson, Jared Bowen as well. Jared Bowen, in all fairness, is still having himself a good season. If they do get relegated, I do expect Jared Bowen to be on the way out. He's just one of those players that he feels like if he was playing on any other team, like he'd be more talked about in the league, but because he's playing on a struggling West Ham side, he's not really talked about. But if I'm a West Ham fan, I'm really concerned because ownership kind of seems confused on what to do. Managerial changes are starting to become very frequent with them. Players seem to want to leave when a bigger club comes in. I mean, you saw it with Declan Rice. You saw it with Kudos. Those are just 2 off the top of my head. Higher-ups don't really seem to have great communication from manager to player, because Kufal just did an interview saying that he always expected he was retiring at West Ham. And then one day at the end of training was pulled aside by Graham Potter and said, they're not renewing your contract. His 5-year career came down to a not even 30-second conversation. That was that. And now it just shows that lack of respect, I think, between, higher ups to players. And if you kind of are confused with what you're doing on the pitch and what you're doing behind the scenes, it kind of spells disaster. And I'm going to make a comparison. I could see them going the way of like a Leicester, who looked like for a bit there, they had it made in the Prem champs, Champions League, then they were making Champions League pushes, FA Cup, like they were doing good. Community Shields, they were doing pretty good. And if you ask an Arsenal fan, a Community Shield is a pretty big deal. Sorry, I will always get a shot in on Arsenal when I can. I just think that West Ham, of course, they didn't reach those highs of that Leicester did in the 2010s. But West Ham, have had some success recently. The Europa Conference League was a big get for their club. That was huge for West Ham. The sales, albeit I think that the sales of players have kind of ended up biting them, but to make £100 million sale of a Declan Rice, that money could have been invested into such great things, and it hasn't happened. So I would be concerned because you've seen Leicester, who felt like a Premier League staple, as West Ham have felt like a Premier League staple for the last, 10, 15 years since they came up. Leicester was a Prem staple for about 10 years when they came up, or 8, give or take a few years. And then they went down, came back up from the Championship, went back down. I could see that in West Ham's future if they don't get their stuff together. I know that's kind of a weird comparison, I guess, but that's just kind of what I see. A Prem staple goes down, and then I just really think that could be a nail in the coffin for a club like West Ham. Moving up the table, Nottingham Forest have really failed to replicate the highs of last season. And not to toot my own horn here, I did kind of see this coming. It felt like towards the end of last season they had been figured out, and then their summer didn't really show me anything to make me go, okay, they're going to really double down here for Nuno and back him to the moon. They've already they're on to their third manager this season. They had Nuno at the start of the season, brought him in, didn't bring him in, sacked him, brought in Ange Postecoglou, sacked him after 2 months in the job? It wasn't long, and now have the most beautiful man in the world, Sean Dyche, as their manager. Sean Dyche gives me faith for them, but not in the sense of I think that we're going to see Nottingham Forest go on to do the things that they were doing at the end of last season, challenging for Champions League, finishing in a Europa Conference League spot, and then throwing a fit, and then going into the Europa League. Sorry, that whole situation just sits terribly with me. Just the fact that they kind of knocked Crystal Palace out of the Europa League and down into the Conference League for Nottingham Forest to go into the Conference League because their owner, I don't know. We'll move past it. I just think appointing Sean Dyche, who I love Sean Dyche, by the way. I absolutely adore Sean Dyche. But appointing a Sean Dyche, to me, screams, we're not trying to push on from what we did last season under Nuno. When they brought in Ange, you thought, okay, maybe they're trying to push on. It didn't work, granted. They also didn't give him a whole ton of time. But you could see it was like, okay, they still want to be considered one of those teams that is pushing for a Champions League spot, or at least Europa League spot, keeping it in amongst those European places. But you bring in a guy like Sean Dyche, connotations come with a Sean Dyche of he plays a certain brand of football and he helps a certain type of team avoid relegation. And that's what I think that the Sean Dyche appointment screams. It's don't get relegated. We're not trying to push on for Europe anymore. We're trying to not get relegated. And fair is fair. No one wants to get relegated. Of course. Who wants to get relegated? No one. No one does. No one does. My thing is you appoint a guy like Sean Dyche, you're kind of telling your fan base that, hey, did you enjoy last season? Yeah, it's not happening again. It's not happening again. We're not pushing for that again. It's not. That's what it kind of tells me. I'd love to be proven wrong because I also love, like I said, Sean Dyche. But given that they're sitting 17th after 15 games played, it would take not a huge run because the league is pretty close because I think the quality of the league isn't great this season. And we'll kind of get into that the more we get up the table. So it wouldn't take a huge turnaround, but it would take a relatively sized turnaround for them to see this one out. I do think that they do still have quite good players. Nico Williams has enjoyed, I think, a pretty good season. Morgan Gibbs-White, of course. Ryan Yates as well. Callum Hudson-Odoi. Sorry, as I cough. Omar Hutchinson, I think, was a smart piece of business for them. I'm still kind of waiting for them to bring out the best in him. But he is a young player as well, so maybe he needs that time. And, of course, spent last season playing with Ipswich, which is a different kind of team than a Forest. Ipswich were trying to fight for their lives last season. Forest, who I get, well, in a sense, I guess not really super different because Forest have found themselves in a relegation battle. So retract that statement. But yeah, I think that this is a very disappointing season, but I guess predictable season for Nottingham Forest. I felt this was the way it was going to go for Forest. It just is a shame that you haven't seen them build on what they did last season, and now being in Europe, I think it's just been a tough season for them to balance, and you have not seen the best of Nottingham Forest this season. I'm not sure we will see the best of a Nottingham Forest this season. Above them, Leeds United. The guys that ruined my midweek last week when they beat Chelsea 3-1. What I've liked about Leeds this season is they've really racked up some big results, beating Everton on the opening day of the season. And of course, it was the opening day of the season, but Everton have since gone on to have a very good season so far. So that's a huge win in retrospect. Drawing a team like Newcastle, beating, in theory, a relegation rival like a Wolves. Going toe-to-toe with Tottenham, of course they did lose, but getting points against Bournemouth as well. A win against West Ham, another team who is struggling with relegation. Narrowly losing to Man City, showing that they got that fight in them. Narrowly losing to Villa, once again, showing they got a fight in them. Beating Chelsea. And most recently, over this past weekend, drawing 3-3 with Liverpool after they went down to 2-0, and then going down 3-2, and what was it, the 85th minute, somewhere in there, and then still scratching and clawing, getting a result. It's showing that this Leeds team, maybe they do still end up going down. I don't know. But they are showing that they have that fight. They are capable of big results. What I've also really liked about Leeds this season is the way that they've played. They've played like big guys. They've signed a lot of big guys in the offseason in that transfer window. Guys like Bayol from Udinese, James Justin as well is a pretty good signing from Leicester, who was one of the Leicester boys that I really was hoping would find a way out. Sean Longstaff, just Calvert-Lewin, big physical players, and they've really used that to their advantage. And those guys really complement the smaller kind of trickier players like a Wilfred Nyata, Jack Harrison, as my voice is going again, a Brennan Aronson, a Dan James. These guys are complementing each other really, really nicely. And I think for Leeds, that's really worked. And as you've seen, as I just listed off, it's helped them kind of gut out big results. Of course, they are one of those teams that is battling relegation, so you do see them drop points. You do see them, lose games pretty badly, the 5-0 against Man City. But they're at least showing, which we haven't seen from promoted sides as of recent, they're showing that they got fight. They're showing that they have that, I don't want to say wow factor, but that factor about, that X factor, I guess, about them of we could get a result in this game. And that has been uncommon amongst newly promoted sides. And what I like is that Daniel Farker, got to be careful how I say his name, has, making myself laugh here. What I've liked about Daniel Fark is that he doesn't just put out the same tactics and the same lineup every single game. He changes it up depending on the teams that he plays. And I think that is huge because he's not just going, well, this worked last game, so it'll work this game. He's going, it worked last game, but now we're playing a different team. So we need to line up differently, nullify, say, Liverpool's attack. We need to nullify Chelsea's midfield. We need to, just X, Y, Z, different things. He analyzes it. He's really showing his maturity as a manager and is really setting up his Leeds team for success, the best that he can. If it results in them staying up, that is to be seen, to be determined. But at the moment, they do look pretty decent. Moving above them, Fulham, not having as great of a season as they did last time out. But that being said, are still doing good. And what I do like about Fulham is, one, their manager, Marco Silva. I think he's a great manager. And he's really helped take this team, this Fulham team, who for the last, decade, more than a decade really, have been yo-yoing between the Championship and the Premier League, Championship, Premier League. He's really brought in a stability in Fulham with the way he plays, the players that they've signed. Of course, this season it hasn't gone as well as it did the last couple of seasons, but you still get that confidence in Fulham. That's like, I feel like they might be safe still, even though they're still pretty close to that relegation zone. I feel like it's like, but with a guy as good as Marco Silva and as good as some of the players that they do have, I feel like they might be good. It's come down to some results just not going their way over the season. That 5-4 against Man City, they were 5-1 down, and if it wasn't for a last-minute goal line clearance, they would have had a point there. Who comes back from 5-1 down? I know they didn't, but it's a game of centimeters at that point. They were so close. Big results against like Sunderland, Tottenham. They went. And another game where they narrowly lost against a Crystal Palace, a big win over Wolves. Losses to Villa and Bournemouth stick out, as well as some games that they maybe would want back, would want to redo. But then once again, wins over Brentford and Leeds, they still have the results in their favor. They still look like they're doing good. And a player that I want to highlight is Harry Wilson. Has had a standout season, and I've always been a Harry Wilson fan. I think he is quite good. He looks just so reinvigorated this season, scoring goals for fun. It feels like this season, 4 goals, 1 assist so far, and if you go back and watch those goals, they're all quite nice. He just looks like a player that could do something special. You know how every year we have those couple of guys in those not bottom tier clubs, but bottom half clubs. You have those guys that they just are balling, and if they were on a top half club, a top 6 club, we'd be talking about them more. We're not talking about Harry Wilson because he's not on, say, a Man City per se, just for instance. But he's having a very great season. Off the ball, he looks great. Chances he's creating, he looks great. His passing accuracy, if you care about that, looks very good too. But he just looks a very good player. And then you have guys like Raul Jimenez, Rodrigo Munoz, Alex Iwobi, Adama Traore, Emile Smith-Rowe, Ryan Sessegnon, Josh King. They have good players. I'm confident with Fulham, even though they are pretty close to that drop zone, just 4 points safe of it right now. I'm pretty confident with Fulham that they're going to have a pretty decent season going forward. And watch, I just totally kicked myself in the face, and they're going to get relegated now. But no, I genuinely think that Fulham are doing really well and look quite good. 14th, Brentford. Another team that kind of lost a lot of big players in the summer, but have done pretty well. And once again, as I just pumped Marco Silva's tires, I'm also going to pump Keith Andrews' tires. And that is for a different reason, because going into this season, I was concerned for Brentford, given the losses that they suffered, both with guys like Wissa and Embuemo, and then, of course, losing Thomas Frank, who was their great manager for the last couple of seasons. And I was concerned because this is Keith Andrews' first ever time being the guy. He's the head coach. He's the manager, So I was quite concerned for Brentford. But honestly, they look pretty good. They're still that team as they were last season, where it's like, they're probably not going to finish higher than mid-table, but they are still that team where you go into a game and you're like, okay, but they are capable of pulling something off here. They're just that tricky team to play, that tricky team to beat. And guys have really stepped up for them this season as well. Guys like Kelleher, who has been a second stringer for Liverpool for basically a majority of his career, and now has gotten the chance to come to Brentford, be the number one, be the guy. And he's really shown that he is a number one caliber goalkeeper. And then you have guys in the defense, Ethan Pinnock, Aaron Hickey. Nathan Collins, just to name a couple. Of Van de Berg as well has had a pretty good season. And then the midfield, Kevin Scharter, Jordan Henderson was a good get. Fabio Carvalho, Mikael Damsgaard has that X factor when he's allowed to kind of roam. And then you have a guy like Igor Thiago, who has had a pretty decent start to the season as well. So you have all these guys still stepping up for Brentford, and they all just make it so difficult when you play Brentford. So once again, as I said for Fulham, as though Brentford obviously are not mathematically safe yet, I really don't think that there's much concern for them to be going down at this moment, unless you do see like a mid-season capitulation. But yeah, they do look they look the same, They did lose big guns for them, but they've brought in and used guys that were already at their disposal, and they just still are that difficult team to play. You don't want to play Brentford, You're coming into a run of games and you see Brentford and you go, "Oh no. They could get a result against us." So as I said, I don't picture them finishing higher than probably 10th or 9th or something, like mid-table range. I see them falling in around the 12-ish range. But they are still that team that they're just so difficult to play and so difficult to beat. Now moving up to 13th, and really this is kind of where it gets super close from 4th all the way to 13th, just 6 points separating all of them. Crazy times. But we'll start with Bournemouth, who are, of course, in 13th. Much like Brentford, they are a tough team to play, Bournemouth. And they do have some of that individual quality, but just as a team, as a unit, they move so well and make it so hard for opponents to really get into games and find that joy. A guy like Semenyo is enjoying just such a good season, man. Like, he's been one of the players to watch outside of those big clubs, quote unquote. He's been really fun to watch. I think Kluivert has been fun to watch this season as well. Although his stats aren't as great as they were last season, he kind of enjoyed a really great scoring spell last season. I still just think on the ball, he looks he's just a lot of fun, He's just a lot of fun, and that's what I like about Bournemouth. They just feel like a fun team to watch. Not as fun as they were last season, where it felt like you had to watch Bournemouth. They felt like that team as a neutral you'd want to watch. This season, it hasn't been the same case, but they have still enjoyed some big results this season as well. Looking at their Tottenham wins, a Chelsea draw, a Leeds draw, Palace draw, And I think that's what it boils down to. Last year, some of those draws were wins, whereas this season they're draws. So not enjoying that same success, but still enjoying success nonetheless. And kind of like Brentford, have made themselves feel like, Brentford and Fulham, I should say, made themselves feel like a Premier League, like a stable team in the Premier League at the moment. And that's always good. You want to see new teams come up. Although they came up years ago, but then got relegated, then came back up. You want to see this where they find that stability and are able to carve out a Premier League path, per se, a Premier League stability. We'll leave it at that, and we'll talk about the team above them. A lot was made about this team in 12th. This team, of course, is Manchester United, who, as we know, have a lot of history behind them. But since really Fergie left, it has been very turbulent at Manchester United. I thought at the start of the season that you might see United actually kick on, maybe make a push for Europe, whether it be, I didn't really think Champions League. I was thinking more so Europa League. And I don't think that's out of the question, because they still haven't played yet as of recording this, so they could actually move up the table if they do win over Wolves, which I kind of expect them to. They could move up onto 25 points and would most likely take them to 6 unless they blow Wolves out by over 10 goals. Then they would go to 5th above Chelsea. But they could go up to 6. Which, once again, shows you kind of how close the league is at the moment, with the points difference between everyone not being a whole ton just yet. But you could genuinely see that happening. With United, though, I just think that they're still suffering from the same problems that they did last season, but they're going about it in a different way, if that makes sense. Like they're getting some good results as they did last season, but they're also just still missing something. They just don't have that. They don't have that united factor that we've come to know over the years. They don't have that superstar, it feels like, in their team. They did make some smart adjustments in the transfer window. Bringing in a new goalkeeper, I think, was absolutely huge for them. Bringing in Emblemo and Cunha, who, of course, haven't hit the numbers that I think people would have wanted them to, but I do think that they've been positive reinforcements into this squad. And I do think that there is still room for both of them to grow and for us to see the best of them. Cunha, of course, only has the one goal. And so you do expect a player of his quality to either lock in and do a bit better, or maybe we are seeing that United curse take effect of when they sign someone and they're just not great. Brian Embuemo, I do think, has been pretty good. He's putting up pretty good numbers. 5 goals, 1 assist so far in 14 games, for them. That's pretty good. Having Diallo back from injury, because he got injured at the end of last season, having him back, I think, is big. I think their midfield is where I'm most concerned. You have an aging Casemiro, an uninspiring Ugarte, Kobe Mainu, who they've just totally frozen out, which I think is a terrible mistake. That guy has loads of potential, and I think if United were to get rid of him, I think he would have plenty of suitors. That's my opinion. I do think he is quite good. And you've seen him be good for United in the past. So I don't know what's happened for Amarin to not trust him and not want him in there. But neither here nor there. That might be a different discussion for maybe a United fan to have. Me personally, I just think he's a lot better than what Amarin is giving him. Then you have Bruno Fernandes, who you're seeing not a steep decline, but you're seeing him not be as influential as he once was for United. I do still think he is their best midfielder that they do have at the moment. Then you have a guy like Mason Mount, who, third season into his United career, and he still hasn't really gotten it going. Only just completed his first 90 minutes for the club. That's not good. I just think that the midfield is really where they don't look great. Defense, they look spotty. I think they look better than they did last season. De Ligt looks a bit more comfortable in the league this time around. Harry Maguire, although I do think he will never live up to that £85 million price tag United put on them, I think he has been a pretty good servant to the club as of the last couple of years. He's looked decent. He's looked like a steady center. If they had signed him for like 40 million, you'd be going, he was a pretty decent signing. He was a good signing. But because they signed him for so much, I think that there's always going to be those connotations around him of, oh, well, he didn't really quite live up to that level. And that's totally fair. I do think he's looked pretty solid, though, this season. I'm a fan of Euro. I think he has a lot of potential. Luke Shaw, it's a World Cup year, so he's going to lock in to try and get into that camp. But yeah, I just think there's just something about them that even though they're doing better, in my opinion, this season, they just feel a bit uninspiring. Amarin, I still don't think is getting the best out of certain players. Has made some questionable decisions, like freezing out Amenu. Just some strange decisions. I do think, however, he has done well enough with them so far for there to be not much talk about him losing his job anymore, which was the talk going into the Premier League season this time around. So he's done something well enough to be able to warrant those talks kind of dissipating. As I said, if they win tonight as a recording, they go 6th from 12. Shows you how close the league is. And yeah, they haven't been phenomenal. They feel quite uninspiring, but still are taking advantage of this, just the league as a whole not being up to snuff in terms of quality levels per se. We'll move above United and into 11th place with Newcastle. Shout out Sam Fender. Love Sam Fender, by the way. They are surprisingly balancing their Champions League better this time around with the Premier League play. They're sitting 11th in the Champions League. Funnily enough, they're sitting 11th in both leagues. 11th in the Champions League, which are those playoff spots, and then 11th in the Premier League. Last time out in the Champions, of course, it was a different format, but last time out they finished bottom of their Champions League group. Just didn't, and then it affected their entire season. They never looked able to compete on all fronts in competitions. This time around, they kind of look like they're able to. I do know that, but Sam, they're sitting 11th in the Premier League. And I understand that. But then you look at their points tally, and they are still well in a Champions League top 4 hunt, or, Europa League hunt. They're in a European hunt, if you will, which I think is big for Newcastle because, as I said, comparing it to last time, although it was a different format, they looked dead on arrival in the Champions League. Got a huge result against PSG, but that's really where their tournament peaked. And then, of course, in the Premier League, just totally were not really good at all in that Premier League season. But they've stuck with Eddie Howe. They've stuck with a lot of the players. Have sold some players, of course, and Alexander Isak getting sold. But they brought in Valdemaldo, I hope I said his name right there. I believe I did. They brought him in. Who's made them go, Alexander Isak, who? They haven't really missed him. Valdemaldo has looked quite good in the black and white of Newcastle. And as I said, they're just it feels like they've learned from the last time they were in both competitions. They've kind of learned to be able to balance these out. Nick Pope is having another pretty good season. Aaron Ramsdale as a backup, although I don't rate Ramsdale super highly, I do think as a backup, he's not a bad option to have. Then, you got your defense with experienced guys like a Kieran Trippier, like a Sven Botman, like Dan Burn. You have those experienced guys back there. Sorry, I had a coughing fit. And then you mix that in with the youth of like a Lewis Hall, a Tino Livramento. And then, moving up the pitch, I'm not his biggest fan. I actually really don't like how he plays. But you have a Joel Linton. You have a Sandro Tonali, who I do actually really like. I think Sandro Tonali is very good. You have a Bruno Guimaraes. Then, once again, mixing it in with other younger guys like a Lewis Miley, like Jacob Ramsey, even a Harvey Barnes. I know Harvey Barnes is a bit older than the other two, but still, he's mixing it in with them. Wissa, who hasn't really been able to get going just yet. He's struggled very badly with injury since coming in. But regardless, then you have other guys pick up the slack, like an Anthony Gordon, like an Anthony Elanga, who once again hasn't hit the heights just yet. But then you look and you go, Mard. Oh God, I had it right. Now I can't say it. But you have him, who's scoring goals. Scored a great penalty, by the way. I know everyone kind of goes on and on about that penalty, but it was a great penalty. If you haven't seen it, check out his penalty. It's a great penalty. So you have all these guys, and then you have Eddie Howe, who is showing a bit more maturity this time around, having to balance both competitions. You're seeing more rotation with this Newcastle team, whereas you didn't really see that last time out. And I know they did struggle with some injuries during that. What was that? Was that 2023 Champions League? I think it was 2023. They struggled with injuries that year. And, of course, that's always going to play a part. But for me, I always go, well, injuries happen for everyone. And, yes, it does suck. And it can really cost you a lot of great things. But as a manager, you have to then put out a team. And I felt a lot of the time Eddie Howe wasn't putting out his best team and wasn't getting the best out of his team. Whereas this time it feels like he's rotating. He's getting the best out of his guys. They all know that they can be called upon. And it's expected of them to put in a shift, whether it's to get a goal or an assist or, make a big tackle. Somewhere they're going to have to put in a big shift. And they have. So, yes, they are sitting 11th at the moment. But they are still very close to that European hunt. And I think that's pretty big to be in coming up on nearly halfway into the season. But I have yapped for about 45 minutes. I'm going to split this into a two-parter. So we're going to do the bottom half and this half, which we just did, ending with Newcastle. Then we're going to, next episode, we will talk about the top half of the Premier League so far. So from top 10 onwards. And then I'll talk a little bit about some certain qualities of the Premier League that I haven't really enjoyed this season. Just like the quality of play, I don't think has been up to snuff this time out. Maybe I'm in the minority. I don't know. But regardless, that will be next episode. As you can hear, my voice is kind of going just a little bit. And I will be talking about that just because also I don't want to keep you here for an hour and a half talking about, the Premier League. So we'll split into two parts. That one will come out later this week. And I do hope that you enjoyed this first part. Talking about the Prem again is quite fun. So I hope you enjoyed it. Bit different, not talking about the Canadian boys, but, being a football podcast, a soccer podcast, we got to talk about all types of football and soccer. So let's talk a little bit about the Prem again. So yes, thank you so much for listening. Keep an eye out for part 2. We'll be out on Friday. This one coming out, of course, is out. You're listening to it. So I do hope you enjoyed. Thank you so much. And until next time, cheers, everyone.
And that was your Maple Footy podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Check my socials for any and all future updates. Remember to support Canadian football, be kind, and until next time, live, laugh, little.